At my brother's wedding, my son was handed a paper badge that read, "Limited access guest." My mum whispered, "That means no plate." I looked over, walked to the gift table, retrieved my envelope with the $7,500 fund check, and said, "I think you won't need this anymore." My brother ran after me, and my parents shouted, Come back!" But if you've ever sat at a table where everyone around you had a plate and the person you love most in the world was standing against the wall with nothing, you'll understand why I didn't stay for the toast. This is the story of a wedding, a white paper tag, and the moment I finally understood what my family thought of my son. His name is Luca. He was 9 years old. He had dressed himself that morning in the little navy blazer he'd picked out specifically because he wanted to look nice for his Uncle Adrian's wedding. He stood in front of our bathroom mirror and asked me if he looked grown up. I told him he looked perfect. I meant it. He smoothed the lapel with his small hand, the way men do when they're trying to look important, and I had to turn away so he wouldn't see me smile too hard and embarrass him. We arrived at the venue just before the ceremony began, and it was genuinely beautiful. The kind of event that makes you feel like you've stepped into a photograph. String lights threaded through the ceiling like a second sky. White roses everywhere, heavy and fragrant, their petals just beginning to soften at the edges. The chairs were wrapped in cream silk, the aisles lined with candles in glass cylinders that threw a soft amber warmth across everything. The guests moved through the space in their good dresses and polished shoes, laughing softly, reaching for flutes of champagne on passing trays. And Luca, my Luca, squeezed my hand so tightly as we found our seats that I looked down at him, and his eyes were wide and shining. "It's beautiful, Mom," he whispered. He is," I agreed. When Adrian appeared at the front of the aisle, Luca leaned over to me and said, in the most serious voice a 9-year-old can manage, "Uncle Adrian looks nervous." And I laughed quietly and kissed the top of his head. And I thought, this is going to be a good day. I want you to hold on to that moment. Remember that boy in the navy blazer with the smooth lapel and the wide shining eyes. Because everything that comes next happened to him. And I need you to understand exactly who he was before they decided he wasn't worth a chair. The ceremony was half an hour long. Adrian cried during his vows, which surprised me. My brother has always moved through the world with his feelings kept somewhere behind glass, visible but untouchable. Ilara, his now wife, was radiant in a way that went beyond her dress. She had this quality of genuine presence, of being fully in the moment, that made the whole room feel anchored to her. When she laughed at something Adrian said quietly during the ring exchange, the laughter rippled through the guests like warmth. I remember thinking, she seems like a good person. I remember being glad for him. The reception began with cocktail hour on the terrace, and I got a glass of sparkling water and stood with Luca while he ate 3 mini quiches in rapid succession and declared them the best food he had ever tasted. The light was golden, and the air smelled like late summer, and I was happy. I was genuinely, simply happy. Then we were directed inside for the seated dinner. The guests filed through a set of double doors, and near the entrance stood a small table staffed by 2 coordinators in black, holding clipboards and a neat row of gold-trimmed name badges. The badges had table numbers printed on them in a clean serif font. They were elegant, like everything else at this wedding. The coordinator found my name immediately. She handed me my badge with a smile. Then she looked down at Luca, and there was a tiny hesitation, brief enough that I almost missed it. And she reached beneath the table and produced something else. Not gold-trimmed, not printed in that clean serif font. A small white rectangle, like a label. Like something you'd find on a file in a cabinet, functional and forgettable. It said, "Limited access, Geist." I looked at it for a moment, genuinely confused. I assumed it was an error, a clerical mistake, the kind of thing that happens at large events when spreadsheets get overcrowded. I was already forming the words in my mouth. There must be a mix-up. His name is Luca. He's my son. When my mother appeared at my elbow. Denise has always had a quality I can only describe as strategic arrival. She appears precisely when her presence will have the most impact. When the moment is still malleable. When there is still an opportunity to shape the narrative before you've had time to process what's happening. She leaned down toward Luca. Not toward me, toward him, which, in retrospect, tells you everything. And she said in a low and pleasant voice that was meant to sound like comfort, "That means no plate for him. Kids weren't included in the catering." And Luca heard her. Of course he heard her. She was 12 inches from his face. He looked up at the white tag in his hand. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at the badge. And in that voice he uses when he's trying very hard not to make something into a bigger deal than he thinks he should, the voice that sounds like a small version of someone being brave, he said, "Does that mean I don't get dinner? I want to stop here and tell you something about my son. Luca has never once in his 9 years of life thrown a tantrum in a public place. He has never demanded anything from anyone. He is the kind of child who, when the restaurant gets his order wrong, says, 'It's okay,' before I can even open my mouth to flag down the server. He is, in the most essential sense of the word, easy. Not because he's been beaten into quietness, but because he is genuinely, naturally, constitutionally a gentle person. He takes after nobody in my family. He asked if he didn't get dinner in the same tone of voice he'd used to ask if the grocery store was out of his favorite cereal. I checked the seating chart. My name was there, table 7, right at the edge of the chart, clearly printed. I scanned the rest of the table. I looked at adjacent tables. I looked at the overflow list. I looked at every iteration of the Luca-shaped space that should have existed somewhere on that paper. It wasn't there. No chair, no place setting, no asterisk, no footnote, no C coordinator note. He was not there. And the thing that I remember most clearly about that moment, more clearly than the confusion, more clearly than the beginning of something cold settling in my chest, is the understanding that arrived like a key turning in a lock. He wasn't forgotten. Forgetting implies the thought occurred and slipped away. Forgetting is careless. This was something else. This was a list that was made, reviewed, printed, distributed, and executed without his name on it. This was a seating chart that was designed around a table where my son did not exist. He wasn't forgotten. He was removed. Luca tried to smile. I know that smile. It's the one he wears when he's decided not to be a burden about something. He put it on like a piece of armor, lifted his chin slightly, and said, "It's okay, Mom. I'm not that hungry." He was lying. He'd eaten 3 mini quiches an hour ago and nothing since breakfast. And he was 9. And 9-year-olds are always hungry. And we both knew it. And he was lying to protect me from having to be upset on his behalf. I stood very still for a moment. Around me, guests were finding their seats. Servers were moving through the room with synchronized efficiency, placing bread baskets and water glasses, distributing starter, courses. The room filled with the sound of chairs pulling back, of napkins unfolding, of silverware settling against plates. The chandelier overhead scattered light across everything in a way that made the whole scene look like a painting of what a family celebration should look like. My son stood next to me and held the white paper tag that said, "Limited access guest," and told me he wasn't that hungry. I took his hand. Not urgently, not dramatically. I just took his hand the way I always do, fingers finding fingers. The specific grip that means I'm here. You're here. We're okay. And I walked us away from the table. We moved back through the double doors, past the coordinators, out into the corridor where the gift table stood. It was a long rectangular table draped in white, covered in wrapped packages and cards and envelopes. Guests had deposited their gifts there during cocktail hour, and the table was beautifully arranged with a tall floral centerpiece anchoring the middle. My envelope was still there. I had put it there myself during the cocktail hour, sliding it between 2 wrapped boxes, the way you do when you're happy and generous, and you haven't yet realized that you're at a wedding where your child has been assigned a paper badge and no dinner. Inside that envelope was a check for $7,500. I'd been saving it for months. Not dramatically. I'm not made of money, but steadily, in the specific way you save when you love someone and you want to do something meaningful. Adrian and Alara had mentioned the honeymoon several times in the months leading up to the wedding. It was going to be expensive. I'd heard the number in a way that felt like an invitation, like a door left slightly open, and I decided to walk through it. I wanted to give them something real. I wanted to give my brother a gift that said, I see you, I'm proud of you, I want your life together to start well. $7,500. I took the envelope off the table with one hand and held Luca's hand with the other. He was watching me. Are we leaving? He asked. I looked at him. The navy blazer, the smooth lapel, the brave smile still sitting on his face like he was holding it there by sheer will. Yes, I said. We don't stay where you're not fed. I held the envelope for a moment, and then I said it. Not loudly, not for anyone else, though some people did hear. I think you won't need this anymore. I put it in my bag. Behind me, I heard the scrape of chairs. I heard someone, Adrian, call my name. Then Denise's voice, sharp and rising. Serena, come back. There might have been other voices too, other sounds, but I'm not sure because I had stopped listening to anything in that room. We walked through the lobby, through the glass doors, into the evening air. The string lights glowed behind us. We didn't look back. The texts started the next morning, at 7:42. I know the exact time because I was awake, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, watching Luca sleep on the couch through the open doorway. He'd been quiet in the car the night before. Not sad exactly, or not in a way he was willing to show me, but quiet in the particular way that means something is being processed, turned over and examined in the careful interior way he has always done with things that hurt him. We had stopped for burgers on the way home. He'd eaten without much conversation, and then fallen asleep in the back seat. And I'd carried him inside, and he'd barely stirred. 7:42. My mother first. Serena, it was a misunderstanding. Please call me. Then my father, Victor, at 8:15. Catering limitations. Events like this have set numbers. Nothing personal. Then Adrian, at 9:03. It wasn't personal. You left before I could explain. I read each message once. I did not reply. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters to me even when I'm angry. Maybe especially when I'm angry. Large weddings are logistically complicated. Caterers charge by the head. Guest lists get revised, sometimes at the last minute, sometimes under financial pressure. I understand all of this. I have planned events before. I know how the numbers work. But there is a difference. A vast, uncrossable, foundational difference between we couldn't accommodate every guest and we removed a specific child from the list 3 days before the event and gave his seat to a business associate. I didn't know the second part yet, but I was beginning to feel the shape of it. What I knew already was this. In a room full of adults who saw a 9-year-old boy standing against the wall while everyone else had a plate, not one person, not one, offered him a seat. Not a family member, not a server, not a coordinator, not the groom, my own brother, who knew the boy's name, who had carried him on his shoulders when Luca was small, who had been called Uncle Adrian for 9 years. No one. The messages continued. Denise sent 2 more over the course of the morning, each one slightly escalating in its reframing of events. By the 3rd message it was, he wouldn't have liked the adult menu anyway. You know how picky he is. I stared at that one for a long time. He wouldn't have liked it anyway. The absolution of the victim. The erasure that disguises itself as consideration. He wouldn't have wanted it, so it doesn't matter that he didn't have it. He's picky, so his hunger is inconvenient rather than real. He's a child, so his experience is decorative rather than actual. I replied to that one. 1 sentence, 3 words. It was deliberate. Then I put my phone face down on the counter. They called a family meeting. Of course they did. The Castellano family has always solved its crises through proximity and collective pressure. Through the belief that if you get everyone in the same room and apply enough warmth and enough history, the person who has a grievance will eventually feel guilty for disrupting the ecosystem. I want to be clear about why. Not because I was persuaded, not because I was wavering, but because I needed to see them clearly. I have a particular belief, one I developed slowly over many years of being in this family, which is that people show you what they think of you most honestly when they believe they have something to gain from you. In a reconciliation meeting, everyone is operating with something to gain. I wanted to watch what that looked like. I listened to my father's explanation about catering costs. I listened to my mother's version of events in which the whole thing was a clerical error that spiraled out of proportion due to my emotional reaction. I listened to Adrian say, carefully, that he wished the night had gone differently. No one said Luca's name. In 40 minutes of conversation about the impact of what had happened to Luca, no one said Luca's name. I stayed for exactly as long as I needed to. I observed the room. The particular way Victor leaned forward when he was making a point he thought was persuasive. The way Denise's voice modulated between warmth and edge, depending on whether she thought I was softening. The way Adrian looked somewhere to the left of my face for most of the conversation. The way people do when they're saying things they don't fully believe. Before I left, I said, I might reconsider. Just that. I watched hope enter the room like weather changing. Shoulders dropped. Denise smiled. Victor reached across the table toward me in a gesture that was either warmth or relief. Possibly both. They thought they'd gotten something back. They hadn't. What I'd done was give myself a window. What I'd learned in that room was that I was still primarily a financial asset. The loss of the $7,500 was a problem. The offense to my son was a narrative to be managed. These two things were not equal to them, and they couldn't hide it. They weren't even trying very hard to hide it. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for a moment. Then I went inside and made Luca a grilled cheese sandwich and watched him eat it at the kitchen table, legs swinging because he's still not quite tall enough for his feet to reach the floor. And I thought about what I needed to do next. 6 months before the wedding, my brother had called me about a car. His lease had expired and the new one wasn't ready. Could he borrow my spare vehicle? The older sedan I kept for backup, the one I'd planned to sell but hadn't gotten around to. For a few weeks. Just until the lease came through. Of course I'd said yes. That's what families do. You lend things. You trust that they'll come back. That was 11 months ago. The car was still in his possession. It was still in my name. It was still on my insurance policy, which I was still paying every month. 2 days after the family meeting, I called the insurance company to confirm coverage details. Then I called a tow service. Friday morning at 8:45, Denise called me in a state of genuine panic. They're taking the car out of Adrian's building parking lot. What is happening? Did you do this? Yes, I said. Is this because of the wedding? I had thought about how to answer this question for 2 days. I had turned the answer over until I found the one that was most accurate. No, I said. This is about letting my son stand while you ate. There was a silence on the line that was different from other silences I had heard from my mother. Not offense, not calculation. Something else. Something that might have been, if she were built differently, the beginning of understanding. She didn't say anything else. I hung up. Here's what I believe about patterns. They are almost never invisible, but they are almost always unexamined. We let them accumulate, the small tests, the minor conveniences, the casual prioritizations, because to name them is to force a reckoning, and reckonings cost energy and warmth and sometimes relationships. So we let patterns go unnamed and they become the architecture of how we are treated. And then something happens that is too large to absorb without naming, and you find yourself looking back at the architecture and seeing it clearly for the first time. The car was not a new imposition. The car was a pattern with a tow truck attached to it. I offered one more meeting. Not because I was interested in reconciliation. I had moved past that point with clarity, if not yet with peace. But because there was a practical matter to address. My family had come to expect over several years that I would contribute financially when asked. Not always in dramatic ways. Sometimes it was small things, loans and coverages and expenses quietly absorbed. But the expectation had calcified into assumption. And assumptions are the most dangerous form of entitlement because they don't recognize themselves as such. At this meeting, I placed a folder on the table. Inside it was a simple document, a loan agreement template, the kind available from any legal services website. It outlined terms, interest, and repayment schedule. It was not punitive. The interest rate was modest. The repayment timeline was generous. Victor stared at it like I'd placed something foreign on the table, which, in a sense, I had. Denise said, "But it was supposed to be a gift." And here I want to tell you about the word gift, because I think we use it imprecisely, and the imprecision costs us. A gift is something freely given between people who see each other clearly and value each other honestly. A gift is not a down payment on continued belonging. A gift is not a contribution to the comfort of people who designated your child a limited access guest at a family event. I said, gifts are for family. You made it clear what Luca is. Adrian, who had been silent for most of this meeting, who had been doing the thing he does where he looks very slightly to the left of whatever's directly in front of him, remained silent. I have thought about that silence more than I have thought about anything else that happened in those weeks. In some ways, it is the center of the whole story. My brother, who is not unintelligent, who knows the difference between right and wrong, who cried at his own wedding vows, said nothing. His silence in that moment was a full sentence. It said, "I know, and I am choosing not to act on what I know." That choice, made quietly and without drama, in a room where I was waiting for something different, was the final piece of information I needed. I gathered my folder. I said there would be no financial support without the loan terms. They could consider it or not. That was their decision. I left. 3 days later, I received a message from Alara. Not a group message, not a forwarded family communication. A private message sent directly to me from my new sister-in-law, who had known me for less than a year and who had just spent her honeymoon opening wedding cards that did not include the envelope she had no idea I'd taken back. She wrote that she had seen Luca standing. She wrote that she had noticed the white badge when the coordinator handed it to him, and that something had shifted in her stomach at the sight of it, and that she hadn't known what to do in the middle of her own wedding with 50 things happening simultaneously, and her new husband's mother watching every move she made. She wrote that she was sorry, directly, specifically, clearly. "I am sorry for what happened to Luca. What he experienced that night was wrong. Not, it was a misunderstanding. Not, catering limitations. Not, he wouldn't have liked the menu anyway. Just, it was wrong, and I'm sorry." I read the message 4 times. And then I sat with something that surprised me. Gratitude. Not the kind that comes from being let off the hook, but the kind that comes from being seen. Alara had watched a child be sidelined at her own celebration and had carried the discomfort of that for weeks before finding the courage to say something. She was the only person in my family's orbit who had looked at my 9-year-old son and seen a human being who deserved an apology. She hadn't committed the original sin, but she had done the thing none of the others had done. She had named it for what it was. I wrote back. I thanked her. I told her that her message meant more than she knew. I told her I didn't hold her responsible. I meant all of it. The full picture arrived through an unexpected channel. A woman named Petra, a cousin of Alara's who had helped coordinate the wedding logistics, reached out to me through a mutual connection. She had heard what happened. She had been there that night, and she had been sitting with information that she felt I deserved to have. She explained, Luca had originally been on the full guest list. He had been there from the beginning. Full access, full plate, assigned to a seat at a table near mine. The original seating chart, the one the venue worked from through most of the planning process, had his name on it. 3 days before the wedding, Denise had sent a revised guest list to the coordinator. Luca's name was gone. The reason relayed through Petra, who had been CC'd on the relevant emails. A business associate of Victor's needed a seat, and the table was already at capacity. A decision had to be made about who to remove, and someone had decided, someone had genuinely, deliberately, with full awareness and explicit action, that the easiest removal was a child. Adrian had approved the revised list. He had seen his nephew's name removed from the seating chart and approved it. I sat with this information in my kitchen on a Tuesday evening. Luca was in his room doing homework. Through the wall, I could hear the specific sound of his pencil on paper. He presses harder than necessary when he's concentrating. The evening was quiet. Outside the window, the neighbor's maple was turning, its leaves going copper and gold in the early autumn light. And I thought about Adrian in the months before the wedding, mentioning the honeymoon costs. I thought about the envelope I'd been saving and how I'd heard those conversations as an invitation, and how the invitation might have been something else entirely. I thought about $7,500 and a business associate and a small boy's name quietly deleted from a spreadsheet. And here's the thing about clarity. It doesn't always feel the way you expect it to. I thought it would hurt more. I thought the full truth would land like a blow, would leave me breathless and ragged. Instead, it felt like the last piece of a puzzle, completing a picture I had already mostly assembled. It felt like the relief of no longer having to wonder. They wanted the envelope, not the boy. That distinction didn't break me. It liberated me. I left the family group chat on a Wednesday morning, not in anger, not with a dramatic exit message. I simply opened my phone, found the chat, and pressed leave. Then I blocked my mother's and father's numbers with the same procedural calm you'd use to unsubscribe from a mailing list. Then I muted Adrian's contact. Not blocked, just muted, because I had not yet decided what I wanted that particular door to look like, whether open or closed or simply no longer the shape I had always assumed it was. My birthday came 6 weeks later. No call, no message. The group chat silence I'd created was now total. Luca and I ordered pizza. We got the one with the garlic butter crust that he likes, and we watched a movie, and at some point he fell asleep against my arm on the couch, and I sat there in the blue dark of the living room with his weight warm against my shoulder, and thought about what the word family actually means when you remove the biology and the obligation and look at what's left. Later that evening, just before I went to sleep, he came into my room, groggy, half awake, and climbed into bed next to me the way he still does sometimes, which I know won't last much longer. "Are we still family?" he asked, in the murmured voice of someone not fully conscious. I pulled the blanket up around him. "We are," I said, "just not with people who forget we matter." He was asleep again within 30 seconds. I lay awake for a long time. I booked the trip on a Thursday. Just the two of us. 3 nights at a small inn on the coast, the kind of place where the rooms have window seats, and the breakfast is included and the only agenda is the ocean. I packed Luca's bag myself and added the navy blazer without telling him, not because there was any occasion for it, but because I wanted it near us. Some things you carry because of what they mean, even after the meaning has changed shape. We drove down on a Friday afternoon. The traffic was bad and we got snacks at a gas station, and Luca ate a suspicious amount of sour candy and declared it a medical necessity. The inn smelled like salt and old wood. Our room looked directly at the water. That evening we walked down to the beach. The light was low and gold, the way it gets in October when the sun still has warmth, but the air has turned. The sand was cold under our feet. Luca took off his shoes and walked straight into the waves without hesitation, which is exactly who he is. The kind of person who removes his shoes at the edge of things and walks in. He ran through the shallows laughing. He didn't know the full story yet. He knew his grandmother had done something unkind, that some choices had been made that meant we were spending less time with certain people, that his mother had been navigating something complicated. He had absorbed all of this with the particular attentiveness of children who are watching adults work something out, who are measuring the temperature of the room without being told what the reading means. But in that moment, he wasn't measuring anything. He was just running through cold water with his shoes in his hand and his blazer left up in the room, and his whole body lit up with the specific joy of being somewhere new, with someone who chose to be there with him. I watched him and I thought, this is what it costs, and this is what it's worth, that the cost is real, the loss of something I had organized part of my life around, the grief of a family that turned out to be a different shape than I had believed. And the worth is also real, and they are not in conflict. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he understood this. When someone had sidelined him, I had chosen him. He understood it not as a lesson, not as a speech, but as a fact he had watched happen with his own eyes. A woman had told him there was no plate for him, and his mother had taken his hand and walked out. That is the only inheritance I know how to give him, the lived experience of being worth choosing. That memory, I know, will last longer than any wedding. A letter arrived from Adrian 6 weeks after the coast trip. It was handwritten, which surprised me. My brother is not a letter writer. He communicates in the short, functional units of a man who has decided that efficiency is a form of respect. The handwriting was slightly uneven, the way handwriting gets when someone is writing slowly, thinking as they go. He said, "I should have stopped it. I didn't." That was the heart of it. There was more. Context, explanation, something about the pressure of the planning process and his relationship with our parents and his own failures of courage. But the heart of it was, I should have stopped it. I didn't. I held the letter for a moment and tried to feel the thing I was supposed to feel when someone finally says the honest thing. I waited for the warmth that should come with acknowledgement, the softening that accompanies a genuine apology. It didn't come. Not fully. Not in the way I needed. Because here is what the letter did not say. I am sorry, Luca. It was addressed to me. The reckoning was with me. And the person who had been sidelined, the person who had stood against a wall with a white paper tag and a borrowed smile, was not named in it. Denise sent a letter too. Softer in tone, more careful in its framing. It was less an apology than a softer version of history, the events described in language that had been smoothed and rounded until the edges no longer cut. I recognized it for what it was. I had grown up watching her do this with things that were inconvenient to acknowledge directly. I read both letters once. I placed them in a drawer in my home office. The drawer where I keep things I am not ready to throw away but am also not ready to act on. Not shredded, not forgiven. Just archived. Held in suspension. Given no power to hurt and no pressure to resolve. And then I sat down at my desk and wrote something for myself. I don't usually do this. Put things into lists, create formal structures out of informal understandings. But I needed something I could look at. Something that existed in writing the way contracts exist in writing. Because some things need the permanence of ink. I wrote, I will not finance disrespect. I will not allow my child to be sidelined for convenience. I will not confuse blood with loyalty. I did not add anything else. Those 3 sentences said everything they needed to say. I folded the paper and put it in a different drawer. Not the archive drawer, but my daily drawer. The one I open most mornings for pens and paper clips, and whatever small things I need on a given day. Not because I need to read it regularly, but because its presence there feels like a kind of promise to myself. There are things I still carry. Grief, yes. For the family I believed I had. For the version of my brother I thought I knew. For the easy belonging that turns out to have been conditional in ways I hadn't examined closely enough. I carry that, and I will not pretend I don't. But I also carry clarity, which is a different kind of weight. Lighter in some ways, heavier in others, but clean. The kind of weight you can move through the world with. And I carry this. The image of Luca in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, 3 months after the wedding, standing at the counter in his pajamas making pancakes. He has recently developed a strong opinion about pancake thickness and conducts the process with significant seriousness, measuring the batter, watching the edges for the exact moment to flip. He has flour on his elbow. He doesn't notice. I sit at the kitchen table with coffee and watch him. There are no badges at this table. There are no seating charts. There is no coordinator holding a clipboard. No coordinator reaching under a table. No white rectangle with text that says limited. Because nothing in this kitchen is limited. Nothing here is conditional. Nothing here requires a boy to earn his seat by being someone's asset or someone's convenience. He flips the pancake with a practiced flick of his wrist and turns to me with the expression of someone expecting professional assessment. Perfect, I tell him. He turns back to the pan, satisfied, and I think about the word access. About what it means for a life to be lived with full access. Not the gold-trimmed kind that gets handed to you by a coordinator, but the kind that comes from being in rooms where your worth is not a matter of debate, where your hunger is real, where your name on a list is not subject to revision. He brings the plate to the table. He sits across from me. He pours syrup with the focused generosity of someone who believes there will always be enough. And there is. There always is. at this table. I want to say something to you before I go. Something for anyone who has watched the person they love most get handed a white paper tag while everyone else got gold. Something for anyone who has been in a room where they were welcome, but the person they brought with them was conditional. You know, don't you? You know the difference between being included and being tolerated, between being family and being useful, between love that is offered freely and love that is rationed based on what you can provide. Here is what I learned. The gift was never the money. The gift, the real one, the one that can't be written on a check or saved over months or handed across a table in a gold-trimmed envelope, was the moment I took his hand. That's the one he'll carry. That's the one I gave him, and no one can take it back.